Munich, the 26th of February, 1919. A funeral for a revolutionary. The Bavarian Premier Kurt Eisner. Hundreds of thousands pay their respects to the murdered Jewish socialist. Among them is a young private who feels uprooted following a lost war. Adolf Hitler. He had fought for the Reich and the Kaiser. Now he must come to terms with the forces of a revolution. Out of conviction, or just as an opportunist? Behind him is a past full of defeat. Ahead of him lies an uncertain future. How could an absolute nobody rise to dictator in such a short time? What was his power based on? And why would so many Germans follow him into the abyss? Munich. In the beginning of 1919, a civil war rages. The Kaiser, the German emperor, has abdicated, and Germany is declared a republic. Enemies of democracy fight in the streets. Radical communists engage in bloody battles with soldiers of the German military, the Reichswehr, as well as the right-wing paramilitary groups, the Freikorps. Power within the republic is at stake. On the sidelines, Adolf Hitler does everything within his power to remain in the army. His alternative is homelessness.
During the weeks and months of the revolution, Hitler appears to be driven by a kind of political opportunism. It seems most important to him for things to stay the same. And if that means taking part in the revolution, then he is clearly willing to do so.
Initially, Hitler is on the side of the leftists, but then the forces of the right assert themselves. Munich becomes the center of their movement. Hatred of Jews and communists is on the rise.
Immediately after the First World War, Hitler is somewhat at a loose end. In 1918, early 1919, he's not a completely open book or an unwritten page. He's somebody whose views have already been formed in the First World War to a certain extent. We know, for example, that he was concerned by what he called the inner internationalism of the Germans. But there's no sign, for instance, of any anti-Semitism before the summer of 1919. So the Hitler that we know, the principal outlines of his worldview, that is formed from the summer of 1919 onwards.
In Munich, the Reichswehr sets the political tone. Captain Karl Mayer begins an anti-communist propaganda campaign. A volunteer offers to work as an informant for the movement. A stray dog, as Mayer later recalls. He takes Hitler under his wing and sends him to a course about propaganda techniques. It's a turning point for Hitler. He now has a task and an ideological framework, and the chance to prove himself.
He picks up on a lot of things and tries to convey them to those who will listen, testing whether he is well received or not. This allows Hitler's self-confidence to grow and strengthens his belief that politics could be a promising field of work for him.
The Vienna of his youth. The city on the Danube influenced Hitler's understanding of politics from an early age. At the turn of the century, the metropolis is part of the diverse Austro-Hungarian Empire. In 1907, a young Hitler moves from the Austrian province to the city of 2 million. He is 18 and considers himself a budding artist. Hitler wants to become a painter, but fails the entrance exam to the academy twice. He lacks talent. He scrapes by. He spends his time reading and following the political events taking place in the parliament, the Reichsrat. It offers a disturbing picture of the state of the country. Hitler and his close friend August Kubizek attend the often chaotic debates. There are about 30 parties representing the ethnic groups of the Austro-Hungarian Empire: Germans, Austrians, Czechs, Poles, Italians. All argue in their native languages.
He spends a lot of time trying to keep warm in the parliament buildings watching debates. He thinks they're effete and useless. He thinks the parliamentary system is terrible. You need strong men, you need strength, and so on.
All this leaves a lasting impression on Hitler.
Of course, this is a unique spectacle. In terms of style and in terms of the quality of the performance, the parliamentary debates could not be topped. Czechs were particularly innovative because they occasionally used music to accompany their act. It was a spectacle. And for someone who saw politics through a performative point of view, there was no greater inspiration than that.
However, there is no evidence of Hitler's anti-Semitic worldview during his time in Vienna. He supports himself by selling his watercolor paintings to Jewish art dealers.
For his time in Vienna, he probably was not in any major way an anti-Semite at that time. He had friends, he had business partners who were Jewish at the time. He's known to have visited families in Vienna and later in Munich who were Jewish and had friendly dealings with them. He sometimes expressed admiration for Jewish culture. It really seems to have been especially the end of the First World War that converted him into the vehement anti-Semite that he later became.
Munich, September 1919. Hitler becomes a model student, eagerly absorbing the right-wing propaganda. He likely suspects what his superior Captain Meyer wants to hear. It is not the Germans who are to blame for their plight, but foreign powers who wish to destroy Germany from within and without. In a report, Hitler now declares the Jews to be the greatest threat and sees in them, quote, a racial tuberculosis of the people. I believe very much in accordance with the writings of nationalists and eugenicists.
The reason why Germans should be anti-Semitic, Hitler says, is because the Jews and money, the Jews and capitalism, the Jews and the Americans are essentially one and the same thing. So Hitler's concern with and fear of capitalism, particularly international capitalism, is absolutely central to the origin of his anti-Semitism.
And so in the fall of 1919, the first written testimony of Hitler's anti-Semitism is recorded. It calls for, quote, the removal of the Jews altogether.
Of course, we can't tell for sure if he has already decided what the most radical solution is when he wrote this letter. But we do know that soon after, already in the 1920s, he explicitly states that it would be best if all the Jews of Germany were hanged on the gallows until there were no Jews left.
In 1919, Hitler becomes a member of the DAP, the far-right German Workers' Party. The Ständige Bräu restaurant is one of the meeting places of the radical group. Its aim is to win over the working class with nationalist goals. It is an alternative to the communists and the Social Democrats. Hitler quickly becomes connected.
Here, all of a sudden, is this new group, the German Workers' Party. Hitler is celebrated by the members, and it is in this moment that he has found a new home, both in an emotional and in a political sense. For the first time, he has found people who are encouraging him and his political convictions instead of laughing at them.
Hitler quickly becomes an important member of the party. On February 24, 1920, at the Hofbräu House in Munich, he announces a 25-step program to an audience of 2,000. Soon thereafter, the party is renamed the National Socialist Workers' Party, or the NSDAP for short. Their agenda remains the same, a mixture of nationalism and anti-capitalism.
Their basic ideologies do not sound right-wing.
They use the language of the left to their advantage. This kind of pseudo-socialism is a central element for understanding why the NSDAP succeeded in penetrating parts of the working class and peasants so quickly.
Teile der ehemaligen Arbeiterschicht und der Bauern einzudringen.
As head of advertising, Hitler designs a party flag with mass appeal. The black swastika is to represent a superior race in combination with the colors red and white, symbolic of the power of nationalism and socialism. He plays with the contradiction of the two movements, which he wishes to unite under his image of a national community. Hitler wants to shape the world around him as freely as the artist he once had hoped to become. His childhood was not a happy one. His father was a tyrant and often beat his son for not studying enough and failing during secondary school. Hitler reacts defiantly to pressure. He becomes a dreamer, escaping into fantasy worlds. He seeks comfort in exotic adventure novels. And above all, the music of Richard Wagner. The opera in Vienna. For over 150 years, it has been a place of longing for music lovers, including young Adolf Hitler. Standing in the back of the hall, he and his friend Kubitschek experienced the spectacle of Wagner's musical theater. Extravagant sets, tragic heroes, overwhelming music.
Both sight and sound are supposed to blend. You can't turn away, you can't lose focus, you are completely captured by what's happening on the stage. If you transfer that to politics, into a stylized and perfected political performance, then you gain the undivided attention of your audience.
On their way to power, the National Socialists too will rely on extravagant sets and passionate performances. Hitler will take his place at the front of the stage, manipulating masses now, and forgetting the cheap seats forever. At the beginning of 1920, Hitler is still a nobody. In January, the Treaty of Versailles comes into effect, assigning Germany the blame for the First World War. The consequences are costly reparation payments. Hundreds of thousands of young men lose their jobs in the military. Outrage spreads across the country, across all party lines. The Treaty of Versailles is seen as a treaty of shame. This will later play into Hitler's hands.
This is the piece of paper that you can blame. And so it became a fantastic propaganda tool for Hitler. He could point at the Treaty of Versailles and say, look what they say here, look what they do here. And it was this concreteness of what was seen to be so unfair that made it such a wonderful propaganda tool, despite the fact that in reality it wasn't.
By mid-1920, Hitler is a local celebrity in Munich, a beer hall agitator, best known for his fanatical speeches. But to further his political career, Hitler needs more: wealthy supporters and access to the salons of high society. Dietrich Eckart, a journalist, bohemian, and an opium-addicted anti-Semite, is more than happy to provide him with both.
Eckart recognizes Hitler's political talents and chooses to support and promote him. Eckart introduces Hitler to wealthy patrons. After all, Hitler is penniless in 1919 and 1920. He eats at the soup kitchen in Munich. Hitler has practically no money whatsoever and no education to speak of. And these people, the wealthy patrons, see something in him that he himself has yet to see. They see him as an up-and-coming politician, the opposite of the typical politician of the day.
Without access to high society, Hitler's rise in the following years would barely be conceivable. Wealthy women from conservative business dynasties also promote Hitler, like Else Bruckmann and Helene Beckstein. They gladly give their money so that their protégé can instill the values of the rich among the population. make Germany great again.
Hitler is one of the most prominent representatives of a new kind of counter-revolution. It is a kind of counter-revolution introduced by the new right-wing leaders, serving the general public, the so-called Volksgemeinschaft, their every desire on a silver platter. Volksgemeinschaft is basically a synonym for the renewal of the country and a rebuilding of the nation for the next war. To achieve this, you need new leaders, new faces, a completely new style, and Hitler promises to be all that.
August 13th, 1920, the Hofbräuhaus. The 2,000 people filling the beer hall are there to hear Hitler speak, the star orator of the NSDAP. By now, his speeches promise a spectacle.
You have to imagine these beer hall rallies like attending a concert. People pay an entrance fee and wait in lines. They don't just happen to be there. Hitler speaks. It's announced on posters.
Hitler begins carefully, asking, why is the NSDAP turning against the Jews? He lectures about honest labor and the exploitation of it. He refers to the Jews as parasites and points to Jewish big business as the main culprit for Germany's misery. Hitler speaks for hours without a microphone.
He could almost whisper. He could just as well scream. He could sound soft. He could sound hard. He spoke very visually. He was always making jokes. It was easy for him to captivate an audience. They roared, they cheered, they interrupted him. This was something that Hitler was particularly good at using to his advantage.
And then the climax of his speech. The former frontline soldier shouts, spitting and foaming at the mouth. What today appears to be the performance of a madman was considered a revelation at the time.
Only someone who wants something from the innermost conviction, someone who shouts it out, is truly convinced of what they proclaim. In other words, this is no paid parrot, not someone who just reads from a script. This is someone who earnestly conveys the conviction of their beliefs. And this leads to Hitler assuming a unique position as spokesperson for the people of Munich.
In diesen Kreisen einmalige Stellung erredet hat.
Coburg Castle. The dark history of the town beneath the fortress is no longer visible. But in the 1920s, Coburg was a prime example of the growth of National Socialist power. In October of 1922, the German Nationalist Protection and Defiance Federation calls for a day to celebrate Germany. Up until this point, such occasions had been an excuse for older gentlemen to get together. But in 1922, Hitler arrives with 600 stormtroopers of the SA in tow. The SA was founded as an athletic club, but it soon had only one goal left: the intimidation of political opponents.
Crush the skulls of your opponents. This will become the attitude adopted by the stormtroopers. Violence, used deliberately as a form of communicating propaganda, assaulting people or provoking a street fight will attract the attention of the press. It is a way of showing that the war is not over. It continues as a civil war. Left against right, stormtroopers against communists, and Nazis against the Jews, the Democrats and the Republic itself. Coburg is one of the earliest examples of the language of violence being perfected and communicated to the public.
Within a few years, a poorly outfitted group becomes an efficient and deadly paramilitary unit, challenging public order. The stormtroopers become the party army, without whose brutality Hitler's rise would hardly be conceivable. They're modeled on Italy's fascists. In October 1922, Benito Mussolini and his black shirt supporters set out on the March on Rome, assuming power. Hitler is thrilled.
The success of Italian fascism, especially between 1922 and 1924, is electrifying Europe's right-wing politicians. And perhaps the most important thing the Italian fascists accomplish is they reach the rural and working classes. Their movement is seen as an example and a blueprint that can be followed.
Hitler has become the unchallenged leader of the National Socialist Party with limitless powers. He has also gained a group of loyal followers who glorify him with the title Führer, leader. Men like Rudolf Hess, who would later become Hitler's deputy. But the National Socialists are still just one of many radical right-wing groups. January 1923. As a result of stalled reparation payments from Berlin, French and Belgian troops occupy the Ruhr region of Germany. Now one crisis follows the next. Hyperinflation wipes out the savings of countless citizens over the summer. And many go hungry.
The Weimar Republic is struggling anyway. It's struggling with its legitimacy. It's struggling with even basics like bureaucracy, trying to run itself. It's struggling with revolution on the streets. It's struggling with polarization. And all of a sudden you get a year. It's a terrible year. And all people see is despair, and even more despair.
Hitler exploits the desperate situation. His attacks on Democrats, communists, and Jews, whom he blames for the loss of the war and eventual downfall of Germany, are increasingly well received.
This is a situation where someone is declaring an intent to build an entirely new Germany, a new and strong German empire. A Germany with a population united in their solidarity. It's an attractive message, and offered to the people, providing them with a vision and a simple solution.
In 1923, the National Socialists achieve a dramatic breakthrough in Bavaria, increasing their membership to 55,000. But one man still dominates right-wing politics in Germany. Retired General Erich Ludendorff, the icon of the nationalists. In the fall of 1923, Hitler travels to Bayreuth, home of his great idol. Richard Wagner once worked here, in the Villa Wahnfried. September 30th, 1923. Once again, a celebration is to be held in honor of Germany, this time in Bayreuth. Hitler's first meeting with the Wagner clan takes place on the sidelines of a nationalist rally. In the Wahnfried Villa, Hitler meets Wagner's son, Siegfried, and his wife, Winifred. The Bechsteins, owners of Germany's most renowned piano factory, have arranged the meeting. Winifred Wagner is charmed by Hitler's modest appearance, and Siegfried hails him as the coming savior of Germany. He writes, "Thank God, there are still German men. He must get the job done."
Hitler, a devotee of Wagner, has been accepted in the master's home. While Wagner himself is no longer alive, his family, his villa, and his piano are still there. This is a form of advancement, the symbolic significance of which cannot be overstated. This is truly huge, and not just for Hitler himself. This event highlights the fact that Hitler is now recognized and well received by Germany's upper classes. The highest circles of German intellectuals and members of the bourgeoisie accept him as one of their own.
Shortly thereafter, Hitler decides on a gamble. November 8th, 1923. The leaders of the Bavarian government meet for a rally in Munich's Bürgerbräukeller. With a squad of stormtroopers, Hitler bursts into the hall, declaring that a national revolution has begun. Joined by General Ludendorff, Hitler coerces the heads of the Bavarian government, the Reichswehr, and the police into supporting the coup. But things don't go according to plan.
The moment Hitler releases people from the hall, his revolution implodes. those who had just agreed to support him begin calling off their orders.
Hitler tries desperately to save the coup. Leading 2,000 loyal supporters, Hitler and Ludendorff march toward the center of the city. But at Munich's Feldherrenhalle, the coup is ended when state police open fire on the procession. A total of 15 putschists die. The man next to Hitler is hit by a bullet. A few inches further to the right, and history would have taken another course.
The plan backfired badly. Hitler attempts to flee the country, and the only reason he doesn't reach the Austrian border is because his car has engine trouble.
Hitler will soon rewrite his failure as a sacrificial march of martyrs, and his survival as an act of destiny. But in February of 1924, things look bleak. The National Socialist Party and the stormtroopers are banned in Germany. At a trial in Munich, Hitler, Ludendorff, and their co-conspirators are accused of high treason. But Hitler takes the public by surprise, taking full responsibility for the coup, stating he had wanted the best for Germany and claims the coup only failed as a result of betrayal.
And it's at that moment, actually, where complete failure turns into sort of partial success, because Hitler made of the trial a quite effective media moment. He got news coverage across Germany quite prominently day after day. The judges clearly admired him. The presiding judge was heard to say at one point, "What a splendid chap, this Hitler." And that is, in many ways, the impression that Hitler made on a lot of Germans through this trial. So he comes out of the trial a considerably bigger celebrity than he was when he went in.
Even General Ludendorff is forgotten by the media. Hitler's narrative of being Germany's failed savior impresses his judges. They hand out the minimum sentence for high treason, 5 years, with the possibility for parole after 6 months. Lansberg, Bavaria. Hitler serves his sentence in the local prison. He enjoys comfortable quarters with his loyal followers by his side. He spends much of his time reading and receiving visitors who offer their support.
It is at this time that a group of patrons and supporters gather and begin making pilgrimages to Lansberg. They visit Hitler often and try to persuade him that he has the talent to become a leader. So we may ask, wasn't it actually them who tempted Hitler into power?
Feeling empowered, Hitler writes Mein Kampf, My Struggle, an idealistic autobiography and a powerful piece of propaganda. His years wasted in Vienna and Munich are reinterpreted as years of study. His traumatic experiences during the war are rewritten as a trial by fire for a future leader. Hitler shares the ideas of Houston Stewart Chamberlain, a political philosopher and outspoken anti-Semite who was born in Britain and lived in Dresden, Germany.
Chamberlain is the mastermind behind the Aryan worldview. His books are holy texts for the Nazis.
Shortly before Hitler's attempted coup, the elderly Chamberlain grants Hitler an audience. It is a deeply moving experience for both men. Chamberlain believes he recognizes a leader in Hitler, a leader that Germany is, quote, giving birth to in its hour of greatest need. For Hitler, the encounter is like being knighted by royalty. He is inspired and reflects this in his infamous autobiography.
Well, Mein Kampf really has two purposes. One is biographical. He is essentially describing his own development, rather untruthfully, but he is perfecting essentially his biography for future reference. So he's positioning himself within a certain political national discourse in Germany. But secondly, it's a compendium and a summary of all his views.
Hitler uses Mein Kampf to outline what will later become his political dogma: eugenics, anti-Semitism, as well as a struggle for resources by German expansionism.
The central dogma is about the competition of species, in that they should be competing for Lebensraum, that bloody struggle is normal, that one race starving another race is completely normal, normal in the sense of good, harmonious, the way that God meant for things to be. This has been disrupted, says Hitler, by the Jews. What the Jews have been able to do is to get ideas into our minds, like mercy, or reciprocity, or solidarity. And those things, says Hitler, are the real evil. Those values, those ideas, they're the real evil. And the only way to get those things out of our heads is to get the Jews from the planet.
Hitler's sentence in Lansberg ends just before Christmas 1924. He is released 9 months early. In this photo, the Nazi leader appears earnest and determined. The photo was taken by Heinrich Hoffmann, Hitler's personal photographer and close confidant. Hoffmann has been a member of the National Socialists since 1920. His studio and the party's office are in the same building. Hoffmann frames Hitler in the center of his compositions. He stages Hitler's power, shaping his public image like no other.
Hoffmann's photos have the appearance of candid snapshots. Here, a politician is shown in action in all kinds of situations as often as possible. Here, we have the alternative to a conventional politician. Both men understand the power of images and use photography as a form of political advertisement. Their image-based propaganda is unprecedented in Germany.
Hoffmann's portraits of Hitler begin to appear ubiquitously as early as the late 1920s. They range from official portraits to candid pictures for magazines and tabloids. It is a flood of images that will make Hoffmann and Hitler millions. Anyone believing that Hitler had been defeated by his attempted coup is deeply mistaken. Hitler has never been more confident. He will revive the National Socialist Party and enlarge it across all of Germany. In 1926, party members begin to disagree about the direction of the party. Party leaders in the Northwest favor socialism. One of the leftists is Joseph Goebbels. He's an enthusiastic member of the party, following an unsuccessful career as a writer. Goebbels sees party leaders in Munich as, quote, old-fashioned big shots. The party is threatened with a split, but Hitler waits, only making a move once he is certain.
Hitler has a very unusual style of leadership. It's very abstract. As a result, people often believe that he doesn't quite know what he's doing, but actually, his approach is a very clever tactic for gaining leverage.
Hitler finally decides to remove the opponents of nationalism, effectively stopping the growth of leftism in the party. But he chooses to keep Goebbels. He invites the gifted orator to join him at his weekend retreat near Berchtesgaden. In Goebbels, Hitler sees enormous potential for the future of the Nazi Party.
Hitler had a very high level of social intelligence. He was able to make close friends and then maintain them. You cannot force allegiance. Essentially, people came to him and chose to follow him.
This is also true for Goebbels. He will remain loyal to his Führer until his own death. Men like him believe in Hitler unconditionally and become crucial supporters of his power. Weimar. In early July 1926, the National Socialists gather for a party conference. It marks the beginning of a kind of Führer cult. From now on, the future of the party is determined entirely by Hitler. Photographs depict him as a savior, accepting homage from his disciples. Loyalty is demonstrated through quasi-religious rituals, such as the christening of a new party banner, the so-called blood flag, a grim relic of the failed coup.
It's striking that so many of the Nazi leaders, certainly including Hitler, were lapsed Catholics. The Nazi movement sort of breathed this air of a kind of secularized Catholicism, and the use of the Blutfahne, that every Nazi flag was supposed to be consecrated. This is an example of this sort of oddly, Catholic, oddly ritualistic cult that the Nazis had.
Hitler presents himself as a leader with the divine right to rule. He is on a mission, made holy under the sign of the swastika. Nuremberg, the old city, sitting beneath the imperial castle, will become the showplace of the Nazi movement. By the time the Nuremberg rally takes place in 1929, Hitler's public image has been firmly established in Germany. In August 1926, 250,000 people crowd into the city to see Hitler. A nearly endless procession of stormtroopers march by. Hitler and other party celebrities have themselves acclaimed. Iconic photos are taken in Nuremberg's main market square, documenting the party's fighting days as a time of struggle and sacrifice. Hitler is firmly in the center. His supporters stand in the shadow. Winifred Wagner attends the event with her children, staying in the same hotel as Hitler. Few people know about Hitler's close relationship with the Wagner family. Both have real interests at stake. Hitler's rise opens up opportunities for the Wagners as he raises their reputation and popularizes the Bayreuth Music Festival.
There are candid pictures and footage of Winifred Wagner and Hitler, for example, sharing a cup of tea. When you see these images, it is obvious that he feels insecure. For once, he is not the infallible leader. Instead, his relationship with Winifred Wagner is one of dependence. She promotes him, finances him, and supports him. This inner circle, to which she also belongs, is not beyond criticizing him. They are invested in his success and hope to achieve something through him.
There's speculation about Hitler's private life. In the fall of 1931, his relationship with Geli Raubal ends tragically. His stepsister's daughter takes her own life with Hitler's pistol. He is devastated, but maintains his role as leader.
He uses her death as an opportunity to further his propaganda, publicly claiming that he no longer has any personal attachments. Hitler claims that he now will devote his entire life strictly to politics and serving the German people. No one knows that in reality he sleeps in late, not waking until noon. He constantly surrounds himself with other people and feels uncomfortable by himself. The propaganda figure he's creating has nothing to do with Hitler himself.
As a matter of fact, Hitler replaces Geli Raubal with a new woman shortly after her death, Eva Braun. The public will only learn about her existence after the end of the war. By the end of the 1920s, the Nationalist Socialist Party has its sights set on winning elections. The emphasis of their campaign is on Hitler's cult-like image and his appeal to the masses.
The difference with the Nazi Party compared to other little cult followers and cult figures at the time is that they organise across Germany and they take over organisations, infiltrate organisations, Nazify them from within. So you need that kind of tactical skill in addition to the cultic saviour figure.
The National Socialists managed to gain supporters even in the smallest of villages. This will be one of their strengths. In 1928, in areas with a high Protestant population, the party registers up to 20% of the vote. In the country at large, however, the party still must do with a meager 2.6%.
The Nazis relied heavily on public speeches. The party needed the vote of rural populations, so they sent representatives to personally introduce their program to the residents of smaller towns. These people naturally felt that they were being taken seriously. The effect of this strategy cannot be underestimated. People were not necessarily convinced by the political beliefs of the Nazis, yet were convinced by their efforts.
In Coburg, where the party had marched 7 years earlier, the Nazis win the majority vote. In 1929, Coburg becomes the first German city in which the Nazis take power. That same year, the stock market collapses in New York City. The whole world slides into an economic crisis, including a debt-ridden Germany. Once again, Hitler profits from Germany's suffering. In 3 years, over 50,000 businesses close. The economy contracts by almost 40%. In Berlin, Chancellor Heinrich Brüning governs by means of an emergency decree with the blessing of the head of state, Paul von Hindenburg. Brüning's cost-cutting measures further exacerbate the crisis. The state seems helpless. In 1930, the number of unemployed grows from 2 million to 3 million. By 1932, the figure has doubled. Only a few years after a hyperinflation, large groups of German society are again slipping into poverty. Hitler begins an ongoing campaign against what he calls the system.
Die Arbeitslosenarmee beginnt nun zu wachsen. 1, 2, 3 Millionen, 4 Millionen, 5 Millionen, 6 Millionen, 7 Millionen.
Hitler's straightforward promises of salvation are well received. Voters flock to the National Socialist Party.
You had, of course, the background of economic crisis, the world economic depression, which had hit Germany particularly badly. So you have people looking for a savior. And here, I think, we have to give him credit for really the consistency of his message, however repellent it is to us, the fact that he was offering the German people a way out of their impoverishment, essentially by reanimating the economy. So he offered an appealing political program.
In his election campaign, Hitler denounces the excesses of global capitalism, a stance that also attracts communists.
The rise of the Communist Party following 1929 only furthers the polarization of the political system. German centrist voters now feel that they have only one choice left: between a communist future and a national socialist future. This in turn leads to the erosion of the middle class, and many centrist voters now tend to support Hitler.
In September 1930, elections are held. It is a landmark victory for the Nazi Party. The National Socialists become the second strongest faction in parliament. But this is not enough for Hitler. He wants total power in Germany. In the crisis-ridden republic, one election follows the next. No other party leads a campaign as modern as the National Socialists. They flood towns and villages with promises to rebuild Germany. They present themselves as a party for the future, against the establishment.
The Reichspräsident is an 80-year-old man. The country's leaders are generally older politicians. This means that Hitler can present himself as a younger alternative. A humble soldier, a private with an iron cross, someone like them. This combination of youthfulness and appealing to the common people was a conspicuous and highly successful propaganda move on the part of the National Socialists.
The stormtroopers continued to incite violence in the streets as a strategy. Hitler's thugs cause unrest. While complaining about the incompetence of the police, the Nazis systematically undermined the authority of the Republic.
The Nazis played a kind of tricky game with legality. On the one hand, the Nazis, through their stormtroopers, were clearly subverting and attacking the rule of law. When they were prosecuted, they presented themselves as martyrs, being victimized by the legal institutions of the state. They progressively delegitimized the Weimar state by making it look unable to preserve any kind of order or rule of law.
During the elections in the summer of 1932, the National Socialists are clearly the strongest party. Yet once again, they failed to win the majority. Hitler fears that his strategy of legally seizing power could fail. He gambles, demanding that President Hindenburg appoint him Chancellor, but Hindenburg refuses. October 1932, Coburg. The town prepares for Hitler's visit. Swastikas are everywhere. The local Nazis are full of confidence. They have long since achieved what their leader in Berlin has failed to do, gain an absolute majority. Yet, images of unity within the party are deceptive. There is a storm growing among the brown shirts. There are forces pushing for yet another coup d'etat. Hitler is under pressure. Especially when the party begins to lose votes for the first time in the November election of 1932. But then Hitler unexpectedly profits from a rivalry among conservative politicians. General Kurt von Schleicher and his opponent Franz von Papen are both competing for the position of Chancellor. It is up to the President to make the final decision. Von Papen suggests that Hitler be appointed Chancellor and he, von Papen, become Vice-Chancellor. Hindenburg relents, hoping that once in office, Hitler will be tamed. A grave mistake. Hitler's unbridled determination for absolute power has been underestimated once again.
We have to recognize that Hitler really did have some rather intuitive political skills. Hitler had an incredible ability to read people. Whether it was one-on-one in a conversation or whether it was reading people in a crowd, he could sense what someone wanted to hear. He could sense what someone or a crowd of people wanted him to be. And then he had considerable resources as an actor, so he could act the part that he knew someone wanted from him.
January 30th, 1933. Hindenburg appoints Hitler as Chancellor. A dangerous political agitator and an anti-Semite prone to violence. Thus, the Nazi Party comes to power by legal means. They celebrate their victory with a torchlight procession through the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin.
Hitler's successful rise to power had to do with circumstances, the tragedy of World War I and the decay and dismay and the turmoil after World War I in the Weimar Republic, and to do with his own character, his belief in himself, his iron will, and his able to learn how to manipulate and to orate to the German people.
Hitler has made it. He has proved a successful strategist and manipulator.
What's special about Hitler is his vision of the world and the sincerity of his belief in it. He wasn't actually making clear to everyone who was voting for him just how radical his vision was. So the conditions that brought Hitler to power were not so unusual, but Hitler himself was an unusually radical figure.
Hitler just seemed like a solution to an extremely unstable situation to many people who were prepared to accept the ethno-nationalist exclusionary aspects of his rule That was the price they were prepared to pay for economic regeneration, political regeneration, making Germany great again.
This way, Hitler awakes hope in millions of Germans. He's still bound by a coalition, but soon he will reach for absolute power.